Let's get cracking straight into those with a look at Croupier.
Yes, remember when Clive Owen was a thing? So much of a thing, in fact, that he was at one point an odds-on favourite for Bond. Hasn't quite panned out that way. But there was a period around the late 90s and early noughties where he had a bit of heat around him, so it was perhaps a surprise when the critically well-received Croupier barely made radar contact for audiences in 1998, UK audiences at least. In fact, had it not been shown first on TV, there was very serious talk of Owen being an awards contender for his portrayal of Jack, a struggling writer who takes a job at a London casino and finds his experiences providing the perfect inspiration. Reluctantly shooed into the job by his estranged father back in South Africa, where he grew up and first gained experience as a croupier, Jack's return to the gaming floor seems to come as almost as much of a surprise to him as it does his girlfriend Marion, Gina McKee. It's not long, though, before Jack becomes intoxicated by the atmosphere of the place, taking measure of, and inspiration from, the colleagues and punters who now, once again, inhabit his life, a life he presumed to have left behind long ago. Transcending his surroundings, Jack becomes the all-seeing eye of the casino, a kind of omnipresent CCTV system all his own, second-guessing the actions, impulses, and motivations of the clientele, one of whom is the enigmatic Yanny, Alex Kingston. Hailings from South Africa herself, Yanny integrates with Jack, who seems at first reticent and then altogether welcoming of the opportunity to breach the gaming profession's rules around mingling with punters. As he finds his life becoming intertwined and increasingly inseparable from the narrative he has woven for himself, Jack is willingly propelled headlong into a plot to rob the casino, posing a threat to his colleagues, his relationship, and himself along the way. Croupier is an interesting movie for many reasons, but it remains little known outside of cinephile circles, and the only reason it has any profile at all is probably because of the sleeper status it attained on the US art house circuit. Marketed there as being from the director of Get Carter, it died on its arse in its native UK, not least of all due to a press campaign that instead referenced Mike Hodges as, if I remember correctly, the director of A Prayer for the Dying, a film that nobody cared for, least of all Mike Hodges, who tried to disown it. It's a shame it didn't find a wider audience, because although its slow burn, noir overtones and lack of action mean it was never likely to set the world on fire, it remains for me an engrossing potboiler that hinges on a decent screenplay, great performances, and Hodges' low-key directorial style. You won't hear me say this very often, but I've always even liked the narration from Owen. In all the times I've watched Croupier over the years, I've never been able to decide whether Jack's writing is the driving force behind his moral ambiguity, or simply an excuse for it. As someone who's drawn to characters of precisely this kind of moral apathy, my inability to resolve Owen's portrayal is, I think, the primary reason I keep coming back to the film every so often. Owen walks a fine line between charismatic and unknowable that will undoubtedly be not to everyone's taste, but I very much appreciate his work here, and I can see why that convincing moral flexibility and dapper croupier attire would have given Broccoli and Wilson an easier time picturing him gripping a Walther PPK in a martini glass. If I have any gripes with the movie, my first observation would be that the relationship between Jack and Marion isn't really developed sufficiently to make one sympathetic to the latter as the plot unfolds. At least I hope that's the reason I feel as blasé about her final appearance as Jack seems to. As intriguing as I find him, I don't particularly want him rubbing off on me. This isn't Gina McKee's most substantial role, and it's fair to say she's somewhat wasted, kind of left to rattle around in a role that is necessary to the plot, but which Hodges seems unable or unwilling to marshal correctly. Kate Hardy fares just about as poorly as Bella, a casino employee who becomes involved with Jack when he forces himself upon her in perhaps the movie's only really problematic scene. Fortunately, the same cannot be said of Alex Kingston, whose role is substantial and influence upon the plot pivotal. If this is noir, then Kingston is the femme fatale, though her input and performance here are more nuanced than that, and when the credits roll, she's probably the movie's only real winner. That's assuming, of course, that rather than attaining a traditional win state, we agree that Jack ultimately ends up where he wants and deserves to be. Don't know what else to say about Croupier, except that I really liked it back in the day, and I wasn't as disappointed to revisit it as I have been some other old favourites of late.
It's quite interesting to me, Craig, that you mentioned the narration, because that was a potential pain point for me as well. I had never seen this film before. I think I've mentioned, I know I've mentioned to you too, I may have mentioned in previous podcasts, that I'd never really cared for Clive Owen. I couldn't particularly say why. There was just something about him I didn't like. I didn't think he was a particularly good actor. Then it was probably Children of Men, but something at some point anyway made me think, oh no, wait, actually, I quite like him. And having gone back to a couple of previous films, I'm like, no, I actually do quite like him. So what was going on there?
Appreciate him a bit more, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, maybe it was The Bourne Identity rather than Children of Men. It's a small role, but...
look at what they make you give
Yeah, so I didn't like him, and that's one of the reasons I'd never seen this film, but I settled down to watch this, and to be honest, the alarm bells were ringing quite quickly, and I was quite concerned because I don't like narration in film. I think 99% of the time it doesn't work. It shouldn't be there. This is one of those rare exceptions. It seems to work for both the combination of internal monologue and the structure of the book that he's writing. And maybe also just the way it's written too. But for me, it worked here. So that was the first thing off the table. But again, alarm bells rang because one of his co-stars is Colin from Press Gang. And I see him and I think he's Colin from Press Gang. And I was concerned by that because I really thought he can only ever be to me Colin from Press Gang. And actually, while he still had a bit of Colin from Press Gang about him, by the kind of halfway through the film, kind of disappears, I guess, but halfway through his screen time, Paul Reynolds, actually no, he's actually cast reasonably well for this kind of slightly dodgy, slightly creepy guy. And I was thinking of more as the character in the film rather than Colin from Press Gang, so that went away as well. The other issue was that Clive Owen can't pronounce Croupier, and it was driving me crazy. That never went away, but I decided not to let it bother me. Then there's the stupid hat. Also, it never went away, but the hat or the bothering didn't go away. The hat did, so that was fine.
When?
No, and the final thing though was fortunately gets rid of it quickly, but the dyed blonde hair, which had this been in the early 2000s would have made you think of Eminem probably, if you're going to think of any one particular person associated with that. In the 1990s, it's more of a Paul Gascoigne thing, and that's not great. But none of those are material to the film, fortunately, apart from the voiceover. And I actually really enjoyed it. Alex Kingston's accent, South African accent, it's not brilliant. I'm actually not sure why the South African angle's in there at all. It doesn't really add anything to the film. You could have made that anywhere. You could have worked in Las Vegas casinos or, I know, Monaco or something like that. There's no particular reason it was South African and why they kind of lumbered an English actress with this, and not entirely awful South African accent, but not a brilliant one either. But yeah, it's just, I quite like how kind of relatively low-key everything is. Everything about the casino, the plans, the criminals, all kind of low-key grotty, and it works really well. In
a depressingly British way.
Yeah, this isn't high-stakes glamour or anything, it's not trying to break the bank at Monte Carlo. It's just...
I've never set foot inside a casino, but I know that this is exactly what the inside of a British casino is going to look like.
Yeah, I'm quite sure it's like it's almost like keep passing the Mayfair in Edinburgh, like Kirkstofan in Edinburgh. And basically, I always imagined the inside of it looks almost exactly like the inside of the casino in this film without even having seen it. It just rings true.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, is just that the laws limit the amount of money that can be spent on these things in this country. So there's they're necessarily less salubrious places. Yeah, all of that is rings true. So it's a decent story, an engaging central character, and I enjoyed it. Mostly of my reservations are the same as yours in that I don't know what Gina McKee's doing in this film. Our character's there's not much of a character there. And I don't even think it's clear at the beginning that they're in a relationship, because when he says he owes her rent, it's so kind of flat and almost ambiguous. Like, is she just like a landlady with benefits? It's not clear that they're actually they're partners or anything. And when what happens to her character happens, yeah, it's like I wouldn't want to be a person that felt so little, but I kind of understand in the films, like, she doesn't really get much of a character, and it's
we're not given.
Gina McKee's really good.
We're not given much opportunity to care about her character.
Yeah, exactly.
She feels a lot like a character that was from some kind of much earlier draft of the film, where it was a bit more of a kind of kitchen sinky kind of drama. Before it turned into what was basically a noir film.
Yeah.
With the detective replaced with a croupier and an author.
I feel like the intention was probably to have him sort of triangulated between these three sort of dominant female roles, but really in the end it was decided there was only room for one of them to be substantial. Yeah. And I'm not convinced it was the right one, really, because I think there'd undoubtedly be a lot more emotional investment if that relationship between him and Marion were a bit more substantially portrayed, but I think it just about serves a purpose, but it's by no means the most satisfying aspect of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Bella character, she's probably even less well served. She's barely in it at all. But when you take the setup of Gina McKee's character, then you add it to what happens at the end, and then they have that line from the police officer who goes, "I was in love with her too," you know. Where did that come from? Why is that relevant?
Yeah,
the character doesn't merit any of the stuff that happens towards the end, or like that you feel like you're supposed to feel from these scenes.
That's what I mean. Like, the framework's all there because you see her start that relationship with that guy after she discovers that, after Bella turns up on the doorstep, and it's not that she discovers, it's that Bella turns up on the door and says, "Oh, by the way." So we see Gina McKee's character start that relationship and there, but like I say, there's no real gravitas to it, or certainly way less of a sense of gravitas to it than. But then, do you know what? Actually, again, perhaps it's just, again, a reflection of Jack's character, that the reason we're not given that much time to care about that character is because ultimately he doesn't. Maybe it's entirely intentional.
I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely a film that like that one strand in particular feels really weak, especially compared when clearly Jack is passionate, because when he lays into that guy who molests him outside the casino, or assaults him outside the casino, because he really hates cheats, and like you believe that, and it's like there's something there, and then that kind of anger and passion mostly goes away. I think maybe they show some of that if he thinks that what happened to Marion happened because of him. You think he would be angrier or something? But he seems like, oh, well, that happened, then I'll go to work now.
Yeah.
I think for me, the reason a lot of that doesn't work quite as well as perhaps the reason why a lot of the rest of the film does work, which is I always feel a little bit detached from Owen's character. Intentionally, I think that's the case. He's playing his cards close to the chest and keeping everyone else at arm's length, but that does kind of mean that when you're asked to invest in any of the relationships that he has, it's a bit harder to, it's kind of harder for us to get invested in it because he doesn't seem all that invested in it himself. So it does make it a little bit difficult to care, but it doesn't really spoil the rest of the film because the rest of the film kind of hangs together just as well as a kind of mystery and, almost detective story as you get towards the end of it. So that all works pretty well for me in terms of that kind of narrative is certainly more than strong enough to drive it through, and I really quite enjoy the film. Haven't seen this in donkey's years, maybe since, I don't know, about the 2000s, I guess, when it was shown up on TV and I watched it there. But it's pretty good. Very much like Owen in this, and can't help but feel like he should have had a bigger career than perhaps he has been given. As whether that's Bond or not, I don't know, but certainly he's generally does not fail to put in a solid performance at the very least. So this is certainly one of them. Yeah, pretty good film. Quite enjoy it.
I think what's interesting about this, and the sense of if we're going to compare it to the next film, is that this sort of surfacing toward the sort of natural end, I suppose, of Mike Hodges' career. I think Mike Hodges is still with us, isn't he? He's not shuffled off this mortal coil, but I don't know that he's been particularly prolific of output. But certainly this is how many years after Get Carter?
27.
Yeah.
27,
So 3 decades or thereabout after Get Carter, you would expect that his best work would probably be behind him. So to see a director at that sort of late stage of his career just sort of suddenly hold up this polished gem, and not on the, let's be clear, not on the anywhere near the same level as Get Carter, because very few things in life are. But to see him towards the end of his career come out with something as compelling as this was interesting for me. When what should have probably, by all rights, have been entirely his wilderness years. It makes me want to go back and rewatch I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, because we haven't seen that since the cinema.
I was going to mention that I have seen, and I don't remember. I think I must have watched that just after I kind of realised that I liked Clive Owen.
Yeah.
And that's actually Mike Hodges' last film, and that was 18 years ago now.
That's mental. I remember going to see that in the cinema with either one or both of you guys. I can't remember though, because I remember absolutely nothing about the film. But it does kind of make me want to go back and watch that again. But there you go.